Hi there, I'm Chloe. On my birthday, my sister brought a cake that said, biggest disappointment, and everyone laughed, like it was just a joke. But behind the smiles, there were years of secrets. My mom forwarding my business plans behind my back, my brother trying to access my financial files. They used my money, my silence, and still called me the problem. So I did something they never expected. I had barely stepped into the restaurant when I felt it. That tight, invisible grip in my chest. The place was warm, cozy even, with its exposed brick walls and string lights tangled across the rafters like it was trying a little too hard to be rustic chic. I'd reserved the entire private dining space at the Timber House, one of the more homey restaurants in Boise. It was the kind of place my parents adored, because it reminded them of Sunday pot roasts and polite silences. I paid for everything: reservation, catering, even the floral centerpieces with those little cream roses my mother loved. Not that anyone would mention it. Minelle was already seated, waving at me like she hadn't avoided my texts all week. "Look who finally made it," she said loud enough for the whole room to hear. I smiled, not because it was funny, but because I'd gotten good at smiling when things weren't. I hadn't seen the rest of them in over a year. This dinner was my way of trying again, something I promised myself I wouldn't do anymore. Cairo looked up from his phone long enough to say, "Happy birthday, sis," before going back to scrolling. Judelle, my mother, was adjusting her scarf and barely glanced in my direction. "Oh, good, you're here. We were just about to order." Classic. We made it through the appetizers with forced small talk. Cairo complained about rent, Minelle talked about her brand, and my dad, Grant, stayed mostly silent, sipping ginger ale like it was bourbon. Then the lights dimmed. It was early evening, just past 6:30. A soft clap started near the kitchen door. I turned, expecting the cake I'd carefully chosen to be rolled out: 2 tiers, white buttercream, gold foil edges, Happy 36th Chloe written in script. But that's not what came through the door. Instead, Minelle stood behind a server, grinning wide, holding a cake I'd never seen before. It was single-tiered, bold pink frosting, and in bright white lettering across the top it read, "Happy birthday to the family's biggest disappointment." There was a pause, a breath, a moment where I actually believed I might be hallucinating, and then laughter. Cairo burst out first, slapping the table. "That's messed up," he choked out between laughs. My mom chuckled nervously, like she was pretending not to enjoy it. Minelle clapped once, loud and proud. "Come on, Chloe, you know it's just a joke." A joke. That word, the one they always use to cover up cruelty. I stared at the cake, not a word, not a blink. The frosting looked almost wet under the soft yellow lights. I tried to remember the last time someone gave me a cake with my actual name on it. I smiled, not out of joy, but because I knew they'd expect me to flinch. And I wouldn't give them that. Riley hadn't arrived yet. Maybe that was a mercy. After the candles were blown out, by Minelle no less, I excused myself under the pretense of needing to call a client. I walked to the hostess stand, heart calm, hands steady. "Hi, quick question," I said to the manager. "Can I ask who called in to update my cake order?" He checked something on the tablet, hesitated, then said, "Minelle Harper. She called the day before yesterday, said there was a last-minute change." Of course she did. I thanked him, stepped outside into the chilly Idaho air, and stood under the string lights. I pulled out my phone, opened the Notes app, and started typing. No tears, no trembling hands, just a list, a record. Because that cake? That wasn't the start. That was just the moment I stopped pretending I didn't know what they were doing. When I walked back in, Minelle raised her glass. "You missed the toast," she teased. "I bet it was unforgettable," I replied, and sat back down. They kept talking like nothing happened, like that cake was a quirky memory to laugh about later. But I'd already decided. This birthday wouldn't end the way they thought it would. I raised my own glass, caught each of their eyes, and held my smile just long enough to make them shift in their seats. Maybe it was time they found out who I really am. Minelle was still grinning when I sat down again. I could hear Cairo say something under his breath, followed by a soft laugh from my mom. Nothing had changed in those few minutes I'd stepped away, except me. The table was buzzing with energy like nothing had happened. Appetizers had come and gone. Someone was pouring more wine. The mood was back to light, even celebratory. That's the thing about my family. They could build a bonfire out of you and still roast marshmallows over it like everything was fine. About 20 minutes had passed since the cake. I stirred my drink with a slow rhythm, my face blank, my mind alert. Then Cairo leaned back in his chair and tapped a small, shiny package against my arm. "Almost forgot," he said, dropping it beside my plate. "Happy birthday, sis. This one's for personal growth." I unwrapped the paper carefully, knowing full well whatever was inside wasn't given in kindness. It was a self-help book. Fix Your Personality Before 40. The kind of paperback you'd find in a discount bin at the airport, screaming judgment in bold yellow letters. I felt my stomach tighten. Manel snorted. "It's a classic, right? We thought you might find it useful." "You all chipped in?" I asked, keeping my voice even. Cairo raised his brows like he hadn't expected a response. "Come on, it's a joke. We figured you'd get a laugh." The whole table chuckled. My mom sipped her wine, eyes on her plate. Dad mumbled something about not meaning any harm. Manel added, "Better than socks, right?" I turned the book over in my hands like it was made of glass. I didn't throw it. I didn't get up. I smiled, but inside I filed it away. Another line in the ledger. Shortly after, my cousin Lacey leaned over from 2 seats down. She had that expression people wear when they're about to whisper something they shouldn't. "Hey, I probably shouldn't be showing you this," she muttered, slipping her phone under the table. "But I thought you deserved to know." On her screen was a screenshot of a group chat, the family group chat, the one I was somehow never added to. Cairo's name was at the top of a message. "Let's hope Chloe doesn't make it weird tonight. Keep it light, fam." Manel had liked the message. Judel replied with a thumbs up. There were laughing emojis, sarcastic comments I didn't want to keep reading. My fingers curled so tightly around my napkin, I thought it might tear. "They've been talking like that since last week," Lacey said, her voice low. "I thought they were kidding, but now—" I handed the phone back without a word. My jaw clenched so hard my temples ached. I didn't trust myself to speak, not yet. I excused myself from the table and headed to the restroom. The hallway was quiet, dimly lit with vintage sconces that tried too hard to be charming. I locked the stall door behind me and leaned against the wall. I didn't cry. What I felt wasn't sadness. It was a kind of mental dislocation, like the ground had been shifting beneath me slowly for years, and I just now noticed I was standing in quicksand. I thought of the year I turned 16, and no one showed up to my party because Cairo had planned a camping trip for the same weekend and took half the family with him. I thought of Manel giving a toast at her graduation dinner, thanking everyone, except the one who always made everything about herself. I thought of my mother's eyes when I got promoted, like I'd done something that made her look small. By the time I stepped back into the dining room, the dishes were being cleared. The energy had shifted again, lighter somehow, like they'd reset the tone in my absence. I watched them laugh, watched Cairo make some over-the-top joke that got more attention than it deserved. Watched my mom fuss over the tip like she hadn't spent the whole night saying nothing. I said nothing too, but I didn't feel like one of them anymore. I felt like a stranger who just happened to know all their secrets. It was then, sitting silently, my smile practiced, my glass untouched, that I started planning how to leave this version of my life behind. And this time, I wouldn't leave quietly. I didn't say goodbye when I left, didn't wave, didn't offer a fake hug or a thanks for coming. I just picked up my coat from the back of my chair and slipped out the side door while no one was looking. The air outside was colder than I expected. I wrapped my coat tighter and started walking. Riley had offered to give me a ride back to the hotel earlier, but I told him I needed to clear my head. That was partly true. Manel called out something behind me. "Happy birthday again!" But I didn't turn around. Her voice felt like static. I kept walking, past the parking lot, past the empty sidewalk where someone had dropped a party balloon, and let the city night blur around me. The streetlights gave the pavement a quiet glow, the kind that makes everything look softer than it really is. I passed a late-night coffee shop with 3 people inside, laughing over something that probably mattered to them. I envied how simple that looked. Back at the hotel, I kicked off my shoes, hung my coat by the door, and stood for a moment in the silence of the room. It was just past midnight. My phone buzzed on the nightstand. Texts from Riley, one from Lacey, and two from Cairo that I didn't open. I sat on the edge of the bed, then lay back and stared at the ceiling. It wasn't just tonight. That cake didn't hurt because it was unexpected. It hurt because it was familiar. A memory surfaced, sharp and uninvited. Thanksgiving, 5 years ago. I had asked if I could bring my boyfriend at the time, Michael. My mother's response was immediate. Thanksgiving is for family. Just like that. Cold. Final. As if the man I had loved for 2 years didn't count. As if I didn't get to decide who was important in my life. I'd spent that holiday alone, made myself pasta, watched reruns of old sitcoms. When I texted Manel a photo of my tiny dinner setup with a joking "Happy Thanksgiving from Team of One," she replied with a thumbs-up emoji. Back then, I'd brushed it off. Told myself they were just set in their ways. Traditional, private. I made excuses for them, like I always had. Lying there in that dim hotel room, the pattern finally settled in front of me, unmistakable. There was the time Manel failed a class and cried to my parents about how she felt overshadowed. I had been working 2 jobs and still managed straight A's, but somehow I became the one who needed to stop rubbing things in. Or when Cairo rear-ended a neighbor's car, and my dad sat me down for a lecture about responsibility, because I was the oldest and should have set a better example. Even my promotion last year, the one I'd worked overtime and missed weekends for. When I told Mom, she blinked, smiled tight, and said, "Well, just don't let it make you arrogant." As if success was a personality flaw. I exhaled slowly, letting it all rise to the surface without trying to bury it again. It wasn't just a few jokes, or a cake. It was years. Years of being erased, blamed, minimized, repackaged as the difficult one, because I didn't play along with their narrative. I sat up, opened my laptop, and pulled up my email. My fingers hovered over the keyboard before I started searching. One thread caught my eye, an old email I'd sent Mom last spring. I had attached a pitch deck for my startup, just something I was excited about. The subject line was, "Thought you might be proud of this." No reply. I clicked into the thread again, checking the forward history. She had sent it, to Manel, 30 minutes later. No message, just the file. I didn't know whether to laugh or throw the laptop across the room. Instead, I stared at the screen, then closed the lid gently and whispered to no one, "That's enough." That moment didn't feel like an ending. It felt like stepping out of a fog. And suddenly I knew, this wasn't just dinner. It was the last test, and I had finally stopped trying to pass it. Sunlight slid through the blinds in thin surgical lines, casting long shadows across the hotel room. I was still in the robe they provided, stiff white cotton that smelled faintly of bleach and something sterile. My second cup of coffee steamed on the nightstand. I hadn't really slept, not in any way that felt restful, but I was strangely alert. There was a clarity humming in the background of my thoughts, like something inside me had finally straightened itself out after too long being twisted. I scrolled through my phone absently until I saw it, the message from Judelle. It had come in close to midnight. No subject line, no apology, just a blunt directive. Brunch at hours, 10:30. Family time matters. Judelle. It was so like her to pretend nothing had happened. No mention of dinner the night before, no acknowledgement of the way things had unraveled, not even a breadcrumb of self-awareness. She treated emotion like it was a weakness, hers to avoid, mine to mock. I showed up late on purpose, 15 minutes behind schedule, just enough to signal that I wasn't in the mood to perform. When I stepped into the backyard, the scene was perfectly curated, like something out of a painfully aspirational lifestyle blog. A handmade table runner stretched the length of a reclaimed wood table. Ceramic dishes and mismatched pastels were artfully arranged. A pitcher of fresh squeezed orange juice sat beside a platter of fruit that looked too symmetrical to be random. The air smelled like toasted sourdough and tension. Manel was the first to greet me. She opened her arms like we hadn't exchanged cold, pointed words through strained smiles just the night before. "There she is," she said too brightly. We were starting to think you'd gone back to Seattle early. Her voice was syrupy, almost cloying. I forced a thin smile and stepped forward. Cairo barely looked up from his phone, offering only the kind of nod you give to a stranger you vaguely recognize. Judelle smiled too, a tight expression that didn't reach her eyes. "You look tired, Chloe," she said smoothly. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine." I slid into the last open seat, wedged between Riley and my mother. Of course it was the only one left. Grant sat at the far end of the table, hunched over his plate. He muttered a low grunt of acknowledgement, but kept his eyes down, chewing like he wanted to be anywhere else. Plates were passed around. Slices of quiche, tiny jars of jam, rosemary potatoes arranged with performative effort. Conversation floated above the table like perfume, fragrant but empty. Manel launched into a detailed account of her podcast's upcoming launch. Cairo made a vague complaint about his boss being completely toxic, like a total control freak. My mother smiled and nodded in all the right places. I didn't say much. I didn't need to. I'd learned by now that anything I said could be twisted, so I kept my words tucked behind my teeth and waited. During a quiet moment, Riley leaned in, his voice just above a whisper. "I saw your update about the mentorship fund. That's huge, Chloe. Seriously." I turned to him, surprised. Before I could even say thank you, Judelle let out a brittle laugh. "Chloe's always had great ideas," she said. "Execution, though? That's where things got tricky." Manel giggled into her mimosa like they were sharing some charming inside joke. "She's getting better at it. Slowly." The sound of her glass clinking against her ring irritated me more than I wanted to admit. My fork paused mid-cut through the quiche. I glanced at them, then at Riley. His expression changed. He turned toward my mother. His voice was soft, but it cut clean. "That's not funny." Judelle blinked. "Excuse me?" "You heard me," Riley said. "You invited her here just to say that?" A silence fell over the table like a dropped curtain. Cairo looked up, coughed once, then quickly glanced away. Manel froze mid-sip, her eyes wide behind her sunglasses. Even Grant paused his chewing. I looked at Riley, and he didn't look away from Judelle. He just held her gaze, firm, steady, unapologetic. That meant more than he probably realized. I folded my napkin slowly and set it beside my plate. "You know what's wild?" I said, my voice level. "How reliable this family is. Always ready to turn a joke into a weapon, but never ready to sit with the truth." No one said a word. "You don't have to like me," I went on. "You don't have to respect what I've done. But what you're not going to do is insult me, dress it up in laughter, and call it love." Manel opened her mouth as if to say something, then thought better of it and shut it again. Even she knew better this time. I let my eyes move across the table, one face at a time. I'm not the version of me you still think you can control, the one who stayed quiet just to keep things easy. If you still believe I'll sit here and swallow this, try me. I pushed my chair back slowly. Riley stood up too, without needing to be asked. That solidarity hit hard, low in my chest. Judelle scoffed. "Chloe, don't be so dramatic." "I'm not being dramatic," I said, my voice sharp but calm. "I'm being precise. There's a difference." And then I turned, walking toward the house with Riley beside me. We didn't speak. We didn't have to. The sky overhead was clear, not a cloud in sight. But inside me, thunder was building, slow, deliberate, unstoppable. The kind of storm that doesn't ask permission before it breaks. They wanted me to break, to retreat, to fall into the role they'd written for me years ago. What they got instead was someone who finally knew the script and refused to play the part. What they got was someone who wasn't afraid of the fight anymore. Someone who came armed with facts, and finally, the nerve to speak them out loud. Back at the hotel, I kicked off my shoes and let the silence wrap around me like armor. The curtains were open just enough to let the early afternoon light spill across the bed. I dropped my phone onto the nightstand and sat down in front of my laptop. Something had been tugging at me since brunch. Not the words. Those were expected by now. It was the ease with which Judelle said them, the confidence, like she knew I'd never push back far enough to matter. But I wasn't that version of myself anymore. I opened my email and scrolled through old threads, the ones I'd buried after they stopped mattering. I found the chain from last summer, subject line, Mom, some budgeting notes for your refinance. Inside were spreadsheets, financial strategy PDFs, and an attachment I'd custom built to help her organize retirement funds. I had even included a sample investment return projection using my company's growth figures to illustrate how compound interest worked. At the time, she said thank you and never brought it up again. But something didn't sit right. I opened a second tab and pulled up public property transaction records. Just curiosity, just confirmation. Manel had purchased a second home in October, a vacation rental she now promoted weekly on her social media, calling it her dream made real. The mortgage terms, the down payment range, it all aligned too closely with the numbers I'd used as private examples in that email. I double-checked my calendar history. She bought the place a month after that thread was forwarded. I sat back and stared at the screen, heart steady but cold. So that's what this was. A family who smiled at your sacrifice, then copied your math, and called it manifesting. By early evening, I was pulling into the driveway of my parents' house again. There was another casual dinner planned, nothing fancy, just leftovers from brunch and a round of let's all move on smiles. I walked in with Riley beside me and my back straight. At the table, Manel was talking about renovations, and Cairo was in the middle of retelling a story no one asked for. I waited until plates had been passed, and silence fell naturally. Quick thought, I said, letting my tone stay light. Isn't it funny how my company's trajectory lined up perfectly with the timing of a certain beach house purchase? Manel blinked. What? I tilted my head. You know, the one with the down payment that looked awfully similar to the structure I laid out in Mom's budget doc last year? Cairo glanced at her, then at me. Judelle let out a short breath through her nose. We're a family, Chloe. Families share things. No, I said, turning to her. You collect things, you distribute them when it suits you, and then you wrap it all in a bow labeled concern. Manel shifted in her seat. I didn't ask her to, but you used it, I interrupted gently. Didn't you? No response, just her jaw tightening. I looked at Judelle. Let me be clear. I no longer give permission for any of my personal, financial, or professional information to be shared, verbally, digitally, indirectly. If it happens again, I will treat it as a breach, and I will respond accordingly. That's a bit extreme, don't you think? She replied, trying to laugh like this was all dramatic performance. It's not extreme, I said. It's overdue. Cairo put down his fork. Whoa! So now you're threatening legal stuff over dinner? I'm not threatening, I said without blinking. I'm promising. The air at the table thickened. Grant coughed, wiped his mouth, and avoided everyone's gaze. No one defended me, but no one tried to dismiss me again either. Later, back at the hotel, I changed into something comfortable and stepped out onto the balcony. Riley stood beside me, leaning on the railing, quiet. You sure you're okay? He asked. No, I said honestly, but for the first time, I'm not scared either. I pulled out my phone and created a calendar event for 1 week from now. Subject: begin the cutoff. They could keep thinking I was reacting, that I was just sensitive. Let them. Because while they played the same game over and over again, I had started building something else entirely. Strategy, proof, structure. You think I'm still playing defense? Good. Stay distracted, because I'm about to flip the entire board. The next morning started quietly, too quietly. I was at a cafe near the hotel, sipping an oversteeped chamomile and answering a few emails, when the notification came in. A simple ping from my security app. Unauthorized login attempt blocked. Shared folder access denied. Location: Boise, Idaho. I blinked at the screen. That folder hadn't been touched in months, except by me. It held personal development notes, old drafts of pitch decks, and a few planning spreadsheets I'd shared only once, with my mother, for family budget guidance. I called my assistant, Jess, and asked her to trace the IP. She got back to me in 20 minutes. Chloe, I don't want to overstep, but it was Cairo. He used the forwarded link from your mom's email. Looks like he tried to access the budget projections file. Same one you sent her last year. I didn't speak. Didn't need to. Jess continued. Want me to log the chain? We can prepare a response if you'd like. Yes, I said. Log everything. I'll take it from here. I hung up and walked the 2 blocks back to the hotel. The leaves crunched under my boots like dry bones. I knew what I had to do now. Not next week. Not with one more warning. Right now. Later that evening, we were all gathered again. This time at Manel's place. She had tried to soften the atmosphere with candles and background jazz, like ambiance could erase everything we hadn't said. I walked in with my tote bag and took my seat. No smiles, no pretense. Dinner was halfway served when I placed a small envelope in the center of the table. Nobody touched it. I opened it for them, pulled out the printed pages, and laid each one down, one by one. Access logs, forward trails, IP addresses, device IDs. This one's from Cairo's laptop, I said calmly, tapping the page. This is the link Mom forwarded. And here, Manel accessed the file last Wednesday. Same spreadsheet, same data. Manel's face went pale. Cairo shifted in his chair, reaching for his glass. Judelle opened her mouth. Now, Chloe, let's not make this a courtroom. I cut her off, not loud but razor clear. This isn't a courtroom. This is me finally showing my work. The silence was suffocating. You used my data, I continued. My work, my trust, without consent. And then you sat across from me and asked if I was okay like you hadn't already crossed the line. Manel snapped. Why do you always make everything about betrayal? It's family. I stared at her, steady. Family doesn't mean immunity. Cairo muttered. It was just information. Exactly, I said. Mine. No shouting, no slamming doors, just clarity. They weren't shocked at the facts, I could tell. They were shocked I dared to say them aloud. I stood up, pulled my phone from my bag, and typed out a quick message. To attorney, subject, go live. Move the release up, full file, Forbes first. I didn't need their attention anymore. I already had the world's. Riley stood as I walked out. No one followed. No one called my name. Back in the hotel, I opened my laptop, clicked on the embargoed link Jess had prepped, and watched as the article went live. The silent investor who funded her family and walked away. My name was there, along with the documents. Blurred names, but real data. Every piece of proof I'd hesitated to show for years. The screenshots, the email chains, the payment histories, anonymous donations, quiet interventions. And now they were visible. Riley sat beside me, his hand resting gently on my back. You okay? He asked again. No, I said, staring at the screen. But I'm done shielding them. The email pings started rolling in. First a journalist, then a friend I hadn't heard from in months. Then 2 more alerts from platforms where the article had been reposted. They wanted silence. They got the spotlight. And I hadn't even started speaking yet. I woke up to my phone buzzing nonstop. Texts, mentions, DMs from people I hadn't spoken to since college, and a string of screenshots sent from 3 different friends. Hey, is this about you? Your sister's going off on Instagram. Girl, you need to see this. I sat up, pulled my laptop onto my knees, and opened Instagram. Manel had posted a carousel, 10 photos. The first was a candid of her wiping tears from her eyes, another of us as kids on the lake dock, and one, strategically placed, of a crumpled shirt with the word disappointment just barely visible in the background. Her caption read, Some people can't handle being called out, so they burn the house down instead. I've always loved my sister, even when she didn't make it easy. This year's been hard for all of us. I just hope she finds peace. We are still family, even when it's complicated. Comments rolled in like a tide. She's being petty, Manel. Stay strong. This makes me sick. Sisters should have each other's backs. You're better than this drama. And then, below one of the photos, didn't she fund your business? Like, quietly? That one had no reply. Not yet. I didn't flinch. I didn't panic. I opened my receipts folder instead. Across the hotel room, Riley looked up from his coffee. Is it bad? It's expected, I said, and it's about to get clarified. I took a breath and opened Twitter. At Chloe Harper. Since we're talking about fairness. Attached. The original contract I drafted for my parents' retirement. Attached. Screenshots of mentorship fund distributions for minority tech founders. Attached. A DM from @Manel Harper 6 months ago. Hey, if I send you my tax info, can you help me cover the deposit quietly? Caption. Not everyone cries. Some of us build, some of us protect quietly, until quiet stops working. I pressed post, then I sat back. Within 20 minutes it started. A female tech entrepreneur reposted it, adding, "Not every black sheep is lost. Some are just done with wolves in sweaters." A podcaster I once turned down for an interview quoted it. "Remember, people who weaponize vulnerability are still weaponizing." Then Manel posted a story. Her eyes red, her tone soft, rehearsed. "I never meant to hurt Chloe. She's always been so intense. But this article, these tweets, it feels like revenge. And I don't know what I did to deserve that." I watched it without sound the second time, just her expressions, just the practiced pauses. I didn't comment, didn't share, I didn't need to. Cairo tried to join the damage control party with a cryptic tweet. "Family isn't perfect. That doesn't mean it belongs in the headlines." He got ratioed so hard, someone made a meme out of it. "When your family screws up and blames the sun for shining on it." Judelle stayed silent. That was her tell, always had been. Later that night, Riley turned to me while we sat side by side on the balcony. The city buzzed beneath us, unaware it was hosting the quietest war I'd ever fought. "You could have dragged them years ago," he said. "Why now?" I thought about it, really thought. Because now, I don't need their apology. I just need them to stop pretending I was ever the villain. He didn't speak, he just nodded. I wasn't angry they tried to smear me. I was angry they assumed no one would believe me. But they had underestimated something. I didn't cry, I posted. They came to play PR games, I brought evidence. But this next part? This one's for closure. 2 days later, I found myself tucked into the far corner of a cafe just off 7th and Alder. It was one of those places with warm wood accents, quiet music, and too much intention behind the chalkboard menu. I liked it for its anonymity. No one here looked twice. No one asked questions. Just the low hum of espresso machines and the occasional clatter of a mug on ceramic. I had ordered a black coffee out of habit, but barely touched it. It had long since stopped steaming, forgotten beside my phone. Riley had stepped outside to take a call, pacing near the window. I could see his silhouette, head bowed, one hand tucked into the pocket of his coat. Alone, I unlocked my phone and instinctively opened my social feed. Just passing time, I told myself. Just noise. But then it hit me like a cold slap, the familiar curve of Manel's face on the screen. Perfectly angled, perfectly lit, framed against a washed-out pastel backdrop that screamed healing vibes. I knew the look. I knew the game. The caption was worse than I'd imagined. When family chooses spectacle over resolution, the real pain gets lost. She was a guest on some podcast hosted by a woman who built her platform on curated vulnerability and trauma reconciliation, someone who invited guests to unpack their family wounds in a way that was just palatable enough to trend, but never too sharp to alienate an audience. Manel's voice came through soft, deliberate. She said things like, "I've just felt so emotionally overwhelmed, and it's been years of mental exhaustion, trying to fix disconnection I didn't cause." Her eyes glistened just enough to suggest tears. She clasped her hands like she was holding invisible pain. Then came the kicker. She smiled gently, practice, not sincerity, and said, "I just wish Chloe would have let us love her better." That sentence echoed, not loud, not angry, just hollow, like someone reading lines from a role they'd never lived. I stopped the video halfway through, not because it broke me, it didn't, not anymore. I had stopped expecting truth from people who preferred a prettier lie. It felt more surreal than painful, like watching a dramatization of your life from behind soundproof glass, recognizable pieces, twisted just enough to disorient. That was her talent. She didn't outright lie. She just bent the narrative until you couldn't see straight. I sat still for a long moment. Then I opened my laptop. No names, no dramatics, no hashtags, no subtweets, just clarity, just truth, simple, clean, honest. I began to type. There comes a point when you realize silence isn't grace, it's permission. For years, I kept my head down. I gave, I funded, I forgave. And in return, I was misrepresented, edited down, and sold as difficult. So here are the facts. Screenshot links. I didn't go public to hurt anyone. I went public because they wouldn't stop hurting me privately. Sometimes the only way to be heard is to walk away without a word. This will be my last public comment. The rest belongs to peace. I read it twice, then hit post. I closed the laptop and pushed it aside. An hour passed. I didn't check notifications. I didn't refresh. I just sat there, watching people come and go through the cafe windows, each one absorbed in their own timelines, their own burdens. Riley came back in, phone tucked away. He didn't say anything at first, just slid into the booth and studied me like he was waiting to ask if I was okay. I nodded once. That was enough for now. Later that afternoon, back at the hotel, he handed me his phone without a word. The screen showed a message, long, choppy, full of emotional whiplash. It was from Judelle. She hadn't messaged me directly, of course. She had sent it through Riley. A last-ditch attempt at control by proxy. We're still your family. You misunderstood everything. You've always taken things too far. We love you, Chloe. I hope one day you'll come home. I stared at the message without emotion. Not numb, just clear. I handed the phone back. Riley looked at me, his expression unreadable. That wasn't an apology, he said quietly. I know, I said. But I'm done explaining myself to people who never listen. He nodded, said nothing more. That silence? It felt like the safest space I'd had in years. That evening, I booked a one-way ticket back to Seattle. No big announcement, no explanation. Just a quiet exit, the way I should have left years ago. Before closing my laptop for the night, I made one final update to the mentorship fund. I added a new grant, funded entirely from my own pocket. No press release, no flashy rollout. Just a quiet line item titled, Rebuild, for survivors of family gaslighting and emotional neglect. I didn't post about it. I didn't share it on my stories. I didn't say a word. But the next morning, a message arrived in the fund's inbox. Just a short one. I read your post. I left my mother's house last night. Thank you for reminding me I wasn't crazy. I didn't reply. I just saved it to a folder I'd created quietly. Healing. And then, I smiled. Not the kind of smile I wore at family events. Not the practiced one. Not the survival mask I used when I had to play the version of Chloe they were comfortable with. This smile was something else. Real. Quiet. Whole. Not because I won anything, not because I got the last word, but because I finally stopped trying to. Forgiveness wasn't the goal. It never had to be. Freedom was. And now, for the first time in a long, long time, I had it. 2 weeks passed. Seattle rain had returned like clockwork. Soft, steady, familiar. My apartment smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and fresh coffee. I stood at the window, watching people bustle along the sidewalk, umbrellas bobbing like synchronized buoys. I hadn't spoken to anyone from Boise since the article dropped. Not a call. Not even a veiled comment. But silence didn't mean stillness. Manel's name quietly disappeared from 2 brand campaigns she'd hyped just weeks before. One podcast host parted ways with her, citing a need for alignment with ethical storytelling. She'd deleted 3 of her recent posts. Cairo's keynote at the Denver Tech Summit was replaced with a speaker from a diversity-led startup. I heard through someone in my network that the event didn't want controversial family baggage distracting from the work. And Judelle? She never responded publicly, but mutual friends stopped tagging her in things. I noticed a few of her acquaintances began following me instead. Quiet moves, quiet exits, and Grant remained exactly who he'd always been. Absent. I wasn't keeping score, I just noticed. What changed most wasn't out there. It was here, inside. I had just finished my morning coffee when an email popped up from a coordinator for a Women in Tech event downtown. Subject line, keynote confirmed. I'd said yes a week ago. Riley helped me fine-tune the talk the night before. He asked, "Want to practice it one more time?" I shook my head. No, I know exactly what I need to say. The event hall buzzed with energy. Dozens of women, mentors, young founders. A nervous energy floated in the air, the kind I used to get tangled in. Not today. When I stepped onto the stage, I didn't fumble. I didn't try to be perfect. I told the truth. I used to think being the black sheep meant I had to fight to be included, but sometimes the black sheep just saw the wolf first. There were nods, some quiet gasps. I kept going. You don't need to be believed to be valid. You don't need to be loved to be worthy. And you definitely don't need to explain your boundaries to people committed to crossing them. The applause at the end wasn't thunderous. It was rising, real, grounded. I didn't cry, but something in me exhaled, deep and whole. Later that evening, back home, I opened a drawer I hadn't touched in a long time. Inside was the birthday invitation, the one I'd torn in half before printing it again out of guilt. Next to it was a printed copy of the Forbes piece, folded gently. I added one more thing, a photo someone had taken of me on stage that afternoon. I didn't save them out of nostalgia. I saved them to remind myself that growth wasn't always pretty, but it was mine. A few hours later, a new message arrived. No subject line, just this. Your story gave me the push I needed. I walked out of my dad's house today. Thank you. I read it twice, then typed back. You're welcome, heal loudly. No signature, no need. I closed the app, grabbed my coat, and stepped outside. The air was crisp, sunlight filtered through silver clouds. No big plans, no dramatic finale, just me, moving forward, finally light enough to carry only myself. Maybe they still tell their version of who I was, but I'm not listening anymore. Before we end, let me leave you with this. If there's one thing I've learned, it's this. You don't need an apology to heal. You don't need to fix the version of you they never really saw. What you do need is the courage to walk away from what breaks you, even when it's wrapped in family ties and Sunday dinners. It's not easy, but it is possible. And once you choose peace over proving a point, everything changes. So tell me, have you ever had to choose yourself over the people who said they loved you, but didn't act like it? What would you say to the version of you that stayed silent for too long? Drop a 1 in the comments if this story hit home for you, or just tell me where you're watching from. If you didn't vibe with it, I'd still love to hear why. Let's have a real conversation. And hey, if you found value in this story, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next one. There's more where this came from, real stories, real heart, and maybe a little healing too. Until next time, take care of your peace. It matters more than they ever taught us.